Good morning and welcome to Rising. I'm fresh off of a double whammy sessions of Dungeons & Dragons over the weekend, but I'm eager to get into the news now. Batya, how was your weekend? A little less adventurous than mine, I think.
It was a little less game-oriented. We had a lot of people over for Shabbat. It was really beautiful. A lot of great conversations, but sadly, no Dungeons and Dragons.
I love the producers of this show are committed to informing our audience at all times of just how big a nerd I actually am. Well, of course, we have a fantastic show for all of you today. Tell us what we're going to get into here, Batya.
So News Nation's Brian Entin is going to join us later in the show. We're going to discuss major revelations in the arrest of Idaho murder suspect Brian Kohberger. But plus, we're going to talk through the long COVID hysteria with the New Republic's Natalie Shore. But first, the 118th Congress finally elected Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House after a whopping 15 rounds of voting in a late Friday night showdown that saw tensions boil over on the House floor. Yesterday, Representative Jim Jordan was forced to defend a viral confrontation between Matt Gaetz and Mike Rogers that appeared to come close to blows. Let's watch it.
How do you convince Americans who watch this play out, including this moment it looked like it could turn into a physical altercation, that Republicans, your party, can now govern?
Well, I mean, Shannon, you just heard from the report that Kevin McCarthy got the same number of votes Speaker Pelosi got last time. She had the same majority number, 222, that we have this time. So sometimes democracy is messy, but I would argue that's exactly how the founders intended it. They wanted real debate, real input from all people, and then you get a decision. And whether it's one vote or 15 votes, Kevin McCarthy is still Speaker of the House. I've seen all kinds of games go into extra innings and overtime. That's just how it works. What I do know is this. We will come together to deal with how radical the left now has made the Democrat Party.
Now that the dust has settled, some members of the GOP are not so happy with concessions that Speaker McCarthy made to the Freedom Caucus during negotiations. That includes a rule that allows just a single member of the House to call for a vote to oust the Speaker. The House will have to approve McCarthy's procedural concessions in a rules package. So far, two Republicans, Nancy Mace and Tony Gonzalez, have indicated that they might vote against it. Regardless, McCarthy is optimistic that the Republican majority will successfully tackle a long list of issues that includes border security, China, and IRS funding. We'll find out tonight when House Republicans try to pass their rules package. Now, Batya, you'll be getting into the concessions more in your radar, but do you think McCarthy is going to be able to get this package through for his first major test as House Speaker?
So a couple thoughts. My first is the Democrats love to talk about how, our diversity is our strength, right? They make much of the fact that there's a lot of gender, racial diversity within their ranks, more so than the Republican ranks. But when it came down to it, nobody would oppose Nancy Pelosi, right? She would never bring a vote to the floor if she didn't have the votes. She really ruled like, what a Republican operative called an apex predator, right? You didn't cross her. And there's been, ironically, a lot of sort of, admiration for that from establishment Republican types last week, as, it was clear that Kevin McCarthy was not going to be able to reach that same status, at least initially. So for all of the talk about diversity on the Democratic side, when it comes to ideological diversity, there's almost none, right? We've been talking a lot, Brianna's been talking a lot about how the progressives completely fail to use any of their power in order to cross Pelosi and the establishment and the more moderate Democrats, which I might think is good, from a policy point of view, but certainly it's wrong to call that diversity. Meanwhile, what you're seeing on the Republican side is real debate, real dissent, real discourse, real ideological diversity. And the attempt by the liberal media establishment to cast that in a bad light seems to me to be like really terrible, really telling on themselves.
The contrast is incredible. I think you're putting it so correctly on the diversity front, right? Diversity, but it's all about the way people look. It's not diversity of how people actually think and act on the Democratic side. Whereas on the Republican side, it was tremendous diversity in terms of ideological interests, political interests, and it was messy, and it was spilling. It was in front of all of us. Somebody their mouth got grabbed by someone behind them. It was a very memeable moment. I think the true winner of the whole speaker fight was that bad lips reading account on Twitter. I don't know if you saw any of that, which they're hilarious because we can't actually hear what the conversations between. Actually, at one point it was Gaetz and AOC or Gosar and AOC, and it's kind of hilarious. But
Good stuff.
But good, I would argue, substantive policies were being achieved, or processes that will hopefully allow for good policies before he didn't even have the processes. It was, as you said, apex predator. That so describes Nancy Pelosi and previous House leadership, an arrangement that came to pass under previous Republican leadership as well, and that Kevin McCarthy gave every indication he would like to return to. Of course he wanted to return to that kind of autocracy, and it took a real rebellion by some characters of varying motivations, of varying degrees of how savory you find them, probably. But I think it achieved something. I don't know whether this is going to lend itself to good policy, but the point is, good policy was going to be impossible without some of these changes taking place, without the leadership feeling that there could be a snap vote to remove them, without actual debates taking place on the House floor. And then I'd like some of that stuff in that rules package to really come to pass. I want the investigations, at least, of what we've been funding with respect to COVID and lab leak. I personally would like a reduction in the new IRS agents who I presume are only going to harass small business owners and Uber drivers, et cetera. But we'll have to see. But I think it was definitely worth it. If what appears to have come of it is what we get, it seems absolutely worth it to me. I don't care if it looked bad. For who thinks it looks bad? The mainstream media? Who cares?
Right. Right. And just three more quick points. The first is that Rogers and Gates have both, apologized. Gates has said he went on, I believe it was Fox News, and said he doesn't hold it against him at all. Rogers has apologized. That's already clearly in their rearview mirror. Second point, Jim Jordan was nominated multiple times. And he did not vote for himself. He continued to vote for McCarthy. He said, I don't want this job. I don't want to be the speaker. I have bigger fish to fry in the Judiciary Committee. I think that's very admirable. I did not expect to see that from Jim Jordan. And it's hard for me to imagine somebody on the Democratic side doing that, giving up this powerful position in order to actually investigate and legislate sort of in a more behind the scenes role. So I was impressed to see that. And the third thing I'll just say is, I can't help but feel that the Democrats don't want to see what was the biggest reform to my mind, which is no more omnibuses, single issue bills, narrow bills on single issues, because it's going to force them to vote with Republicans on important things. For example, the Guaranteeing Truckers Overtime Act, which I really hope will get to the floor, because it will force them to vote on single issues that are important to the American people. And I think that you cannot overstate the importance of this to bipartisanship and to actually delivering for the American people. Meanwhile, Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries had this to say in reaction to McCarthy as Majority Leader.
On this first day, I do not pretend to answer that question on behalf of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but we do extend our hand of partnership to you and want to make clear that we extend and intend to try to find common ground whenever and wherever possible on behalf of the American people. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, but as Americans. But I also want to make clear that we will never compromise our principles.
So, Robby, now that the GOP holds the House, how do you foresee President Biden's second term going in terms of his agenda?
Well, at this point, we have divided government, so that's the end of any legislating going on. Republicans control the House, so there will be investigations, I think, into some of the very merited investigations into, pressure that law enforcement has placed on social media companies. That's something I'm talking about in my radar today. What was going on with gain-of-function research, the Hunter Biden investigation, and with the Hunter Biden investigation, it should be about what law enforcement did to prevent people from finding out about that story if they slow rolled the investigation, not the nitty gritty of, what Hunter Biden did. Unless they do have evidence, and I suppose I shouldn't rule that out, that there actually was some influence peddling going all the way up to Biden himself, that would be an issue. Let's not make it a show trial of Hunter Biden himself, but he's a flawed person, doesn't really matter. He's not a government official. We need to know if it impugns Biden and then what law enforcement did about it. That needs to happen. On the Biden side, I don't think there's going to be a lot of legislating. I would love if what comes out of these new powers that actual members of the House have is that we don't do governing via last-minute debt ceiling raising, with nobody having time to read the actual bill, a bill that no one can vote against, be reckless to vote against it because the whole economy, the whole global economy will crash if you vote against it. That's extortion. That's not actual legislating. We need, cuts to parts of government that American citizens don't think is worth funding anymore. We need conversations about, and that includes things that Democrats have questions about defunding, or some Democrats in the past have had questions about the defense budget. The old regime used to be that Republicans want to blow up the defense budget forever and then cut social services. Democrats the opposite, or they want more funding for social services and then they'd rather take it out of defense. With the new kind of Democratic liberal defending Ukraine is my entire personality, I'm not even sure how they feel about defense budgets anymore. But absolutely, the American people have questions about our spending, including I think this is what I gather from, kind of gauging where the people are at. I think the people have a lot of questions about our defense budget in addition to everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Foreign wars and immigration, that's how Trump won. Those are issues that are incredibly important to the American people. Hope we're going to see some, debate, some real debate on the House floor about these issues.
That would be tremendous. All right, our radars are coming up next. Stay with us for that.